Hello, welcome back. This should be the final episode of this process, getting through these final kind of decisions. I think we've covered most everything else, and there can be adjustments during the build, but I think if the judgments are made on the different things presented, at least in this film, and everything that's come before it are finalized up, then we can get construction drawings out the door as quickly as possible. But before you return to me with your feedback on the first part of this film, DRM10, I returned to this because I knew I wanted to when I was working on that film, and I returned, and I didn't know which of all those ceilings that I reviewed in the first part of this film, I didn't know which of those was going to be your preference. And you telephoned me, as it turned out, and said, 4 beams looks like it's the preference, and that's actually, I returned to this. But I returned to this from a little bit of a different perspective because, as I said, I wasn't sure which way you were going to go with that. I think I can keep this as short as possible. This is where 10 ended, and this was this stuff I had done with regard to that island and some of the ceiling work that I was horsing around with until you telephoned and said this 4 beams were going to be the result, or this was going to be the preference. So the first thing I did, this was where all those ceilings that were raised by means of sloped planes, this was how that was being accomplished at the end of the last film. And that's the actual location of your existing air handling unit there, and the actual size of it. So we really only need those first 5 trusses to be the attic style trusses if we're going to try to accomplish raising that ceiling and keeping it flat. We really only need those first 5 to be the attic style trusses, and the rest can be just regular trusses. And that's how it is, and that's its ducting going out at the moment. Now, for one thing, when they make these attic trusses, some of the diagrams I was seeing were all showing it getting almost half of this width in here, but as it is, we don't need that much. And so I've kind of minimized that. So we return to the original, what's existing up there, and this all gets left alone, presumably. And we create this, and I first showed this 7 foot wide, and only going up 8 inches. I think in the last film, the ceiling was raised 8 inches. The walls were built at 9 foot high. And then in these permutations, I built those walls with 9 foot studs, and then the 4.5 inches. So first floor is built at 9 foot 4.5, and you have to come up 12 inches to get in here, and this leaves about 4 foot 9 where these rafters are coming down. And I guess that could be, you could create a little bit more space, but either way, when you're going up just the 12 inches, when those first floor walls are at 9 foot 4.5, you're going up 12 inches to get into this little mechanical room and get to, and here you could see it's shown horizontal. Here it was still shown vertical, but it looked to me like it's probably going to work out better if, and that unit can be oriented anyway, horizontal, because here's the first, and this is kind of a hard diagram to see, but this was the first when you only went up the 8 inches, and it looked to me like there's 53 inches underneath where those rafters were. You have to duck up in here, and this was giving you 80 inches to that cross member, but I have no idea how this truss ends up getting designed. I'm showing this bottom chord at a 2x8, and it probably can be even an LVL 2x8, but I don't know what that's going to be designed out as finally from the truss manufacturer. So the red line is where your existing, the top of that existing peak is, and the blue line is where we were with just leaving this roof plane down here where all these gutters were aligned. So we move that up, we're moving up 15 inches here. And then when we go to make these walls 9 foot 4.5, that still stays there. We just lose that height off of the heel, which is still plenty high. So now we've moved up 2 foot 1 from your existing, which is good to give this a little more power than that garage gable. Everything was about even across there now, but raising this up, it gives this a little more power. But when I brought that up that extra 3 or 4 inches, I made this room a little more narrow, 6'7" wide, and you have about 4 foot when you come under there, and 6 foot inside the room. So someone has to crawl in there and get that equipment installed in that environment. And you end up with something like this, and I was a little concerned about how this ductwork, if this is going to have room to get past in front of these skylight walls and over to this area here, and how much that would, what's going to be entailed with that. And that's the space there, and that's an 8-inch diameter, and that's a 12-inch diameter, so it's pretty tight, but hopefully that will be enough. And then we may as well cover this right while we're here. This is that window that's in that room. It's no longer a door, but right now it's shown like this, and you would really just have to decide between those two. I would think those are the only two in the running. Backing that same camera up then to the mechanical room, and this thing mounted on its side, and the ducts coming off, and then once they get off that platform, dropping down and traveling east and west. But here's you come up here 12 inches, and then you have about 47 that you have to duck under here, and those first 10 feet is done with those attic trusses. And this, when I got in here, this reminded me of this thing here, which was shown as 2 LVLs, 11 1/4 inch LVLs, and then that wall is framed on top of it. And that's probably the simplest way to do it. Although when I went back and checked that, if you just used a single member, you can use a single 14-inch member here. And that's what you end up with this permutation, with raising that ceiling to 9 foot 4 1/2, which is 12 inches above what your existing ceilings are. And hopefully that will work. But then I looked at this island, and I knew that you wanted to go to this. Then knew that you wanted to go to this arced front island, and I kind of trimmed those corners off a little bit. And I considered, I like an elliptical shape better, but I thought that the foot rail might be an issue, and framing the wall itself if we were to do that in a framed wall type thing. I looked at these and made sure that they were going to be big enough, and they look like they would be for what we want to do. So I return to this, and those are 2 foot at each place setting, 2'0" at each place setting. And that's where I left this island shape, the shape of this top. I left it at this, and this is about 73 inches across here. We'll see that eventually. But this was going to require a lot of work yet. And that was the first look at this, and you can see that as a weird imbalance here. So I was pretty sure that wasn't going to work at all. But a couple things to consider with regard to that. I want to take a couple minutes to cover a few things. First of all, when these windows and doors go from material to material like this, I just have a larger water table up here. So it's one framed wall, and that's done traditionally like that. And on all of these new windows out here, this one, and probably I guess all of them, I'm showing they have a 3 1/2 inch casing on the side, and they need that here to carry this lintel. Over here they didn't really need it, so keep that in mind. They don't really need it here if you didn't want it, but that is done to add that color and dimension to that situation. I'm not crazy about this detail up here, but I don't know what else can be really done about it. And what I did here, so that you know when you're seeing this, is this is a poured concrete wall that comes up, and then this is depressed down in that, however you want to do that. so that this slate is recessed down, because I didn't see a way that was going to look good bringing that slate off the edge of the porch. So that was just a few things there that I wanted to cover before I went on. Another thing I wanted to cover before I forget is with regard to these doors now shown as a double 6-foot door, double 2 3-foot doors. I think that's probably too tight in there, and eventually I changed those to 32-inch doors. So if you want the 36-inch doors, then probably we should bring this out another 8 inches to account for that. But as it is, on some of the on everything that you're going to see, actually, because I didn't do that, as it is on everything you're going to see, those are going to be shown as 32-inch doors, and they're centered in this space. And that we really, if we want to go to 36-inch doors, we'll have to bring this out another to account for that, another 8 inches or so. And that gives us a little bit more margin outside. But probably, to me, even just looking at this, it seems like those should be 36-inch doors. And I don't know, maybe they make a 34-inch door, I don't know. In any event, that's just one more thing to think about and settle. Returning to this, as I said, I didn't think, even though it's balanced from here to here, I thought that this wasn't going to work. So I didn't explore that much any further really than that. But a couple other things with regard to that. That vent is, I think, a little large. It can be a window, but it's probably more honest as a vent, since that's going to be just attic space, and probably a little smaller like that. But this I didn't think was going to work, and that was what we had with all the ones that we were lifting the ceilings with slope planes inside. We had this sort of a situation here. And back to that awkward thing, to me it's kind of awkward. I didn't even look at it from the outside, from a outside perspective, but I felt like this was probably going to be the more honest answer or whatever. But we'll look at this. I did not, as I said, I don't develop this whole idea because there's not another precedent for it. But that might be able to work. However, I went in this route, and this is what we had before we added the entry hall out here. And this was, I guess I did at least develop that photograph of it from the outside. Now this was how it was looking, and this shows an 8-foot door. When we went up here on the first permutations, because I didn't want this whole blank wall up here, I increased this to an 8-foot door. But then I brought that roof plane here down. I think that's a better solution there. And you could still have the 6'10" door, and I think this works as well. So I will be showing that from the inside as well. See, I didn't develop the last one, which was like this, but it had a 6'7.5" or 6'9.5" door, and then 14-inch transoms up here, and you'll see that from the inside. But I don't show from out here. I'm not going to get into that right now. I think this, in terms of raising the ceiling, I think this can work. This looks like I'm showing this door out here on the surface, but it would be just your standard recess, just like these windows are. I think this is probably the best solution from this angle anyway. And from this direction, you can see those doors get smaller. That's 36-inch doors. Here they become 32-inch doors. And this window has been made as wide as possible given the limitation of here and the cabinetry inside. And those are actually as wide as these windows are now. Those are 29 inches wide. This window is variable in terms of how high or low it can go. This was the first very permutation where I just still had that 1x4 trim continuing across there, and the window came up to the bottom of that. And just the freeze was interrupted by the window. Then I penetrated up past that. This was another permutation from this side. And one of the things to consider with this, when this happens here, it increases the depth of this soffit, and probably I think that soffit could be helped regardless by being increased in its depth. But this bric-a-brac coming across here is unnecessary and just it doesn't make sense, so I got rid of that. And maybe that looks a little bit plain on that end. Here we can have that trim because the brick is there, and I kind of like that well enough. And you can see how much power this center structure has gained when it went up. So that was as far as I took this sort of situation here. This high door, when both of those windows are high over there, this high door kind of makes sense, but as that gets high, I think it's going to get heavy because it's already 7 foot wide instead of 6. So if we want this high head out here, I think that the transoms are the way to go, even though that brings the head of the door down below this one, so that's a little bit annoying to me. Anyway, that's the outside, and now figure out how I'm going to cover all this inside stuff. One other quick thing before we move on is notice that when we raise this roof plane up this way, we're able to have an actual overhang, and I've done that with this sloped overhang, not returning to the wall but sloped overhang on both sides of those two roof planes, but not on either of those smaller ones at the porch. And I have this increased to about a 16-inch overhang. Now we're going to go through some of these slides both before and after your telephone call, because a lot of different things are going to be relevant regardless. This was shrinking that table down to a 6-seat table and playing around with this ceiling in various ways. I have these sorted by date now, so hopefully this will work out. So yeah, that was one of the early interpretations of the table and the ceiling. And these are 4x6s at the ceiling with a 1x4 margin around. Eventually, I like this more when this happens. Something like this would happen. I like this more. This is when that ceiling is still only up 8 inches, by the way. Here, it was all the same material on the table. And I don't care for this bric-a-brac at the corners. I mean, at this inside margin, I don't like that. I like that more. You can see how the bar rail or foot rail works out. Eventually all these outlets, maybe those are changed to a color that more matches that soapstone. In terms of these, this is probably what I like the best, just making those level with one another. But I wasn't sure about the sanitary condition there. The only other thing I could see is dropping that and sliding it under the edge of that to make that a little more sanitary. But I did not care for that arrangement because of that reason. Now we knew we were getting rid of that when we got rid of those sloped rafters and all that we didn't need that piece. That went away, and just those two main beams remained. This, I believe, is that wide 8-inch one, and I went back to the 6-inch wide one eventually. This should still be the 8-inch high ceiling because I had not raised that up the additional 3 inches yet. And I think part of the reason why I explored this kind of a particular ceiling was because of this particular photograph here that you had included, which suggested a more finished appearance. But I like this one here, and you can see right here that it doesn't matter that there's not a beam over here at the margin, or that there's nothing that's going into the plaster at that end. You can also see here that this window comes pretty far up under here. But I just am now noticing, I confess, I am just now noticing this idea of the painted tongue and groove on the ceiling. None of the interpretations will show that, and I won't back up now and start showing it. And I had horsed around with that island, but we were already at that point, I had already horsed around with it when you said you wanted to go to the ark. And the ark's a whole different kind of animal than some of these things that you were showing down through here. So this was before I raised the ceiling that extra 3 inches or 4 inches or whatever it is, and I really liked, this is still showing glossy, but I liked this one piece, and this was able to be done with the 2 foot plus the 4 foot 3 or 4, whatever you wanted along here, and have 6 seats. Because remember, when I started on this, I was trying to get people to be able to have better views out the glass and out to the outside from that seating arrangement. And I felt like this offered a lot of different opportunities to do some of the different things that you were showing in that document. So I felt like I was okay with where I had arrived at that. Plus I liked the easiness with which some of this foot railings put together, etc. But I liked it as one piece just because, all one piece, just because of the sanitary condition. And at the end, regardless of what happens at this ceiling, these members stay right where they're showing, these 4 out here. And I think at the end, even though I had endeavored to center this under those 2 above it, I don't think that really matters. And I believe what I did at the end was pull this out to where it was before and just put that centered again. But I didn't explore that much further once I heard, or once I knew that we wanted to look at that arc. Before I worked with that island, though, there was a quick interpretation of the 4 beams at the ceiling with that 9 foot ceiling. And we already reviewed the outside, and this was showing this 1 by 4 margin with these 4 by 6 beams at the ceiling. And raising that helps some because we were able to increase the depth of these to 4.5. But if you look at some of these, this is probably a 10 foot 1 ceiling here, and this is probably a 10 foot 1 ceiling here. And this one's lower, and this one's a little lower also. But all of those are pretty tall, and the beams, as you can see, are taller than they are wide. And that's what we need to try to accomplish, really, to make this actually look more like what is happening in these photographs here, which is what I'd like to see. However, I only explored this to 9 foot 4.5 high on the framing. The next move up is 8 inches, and we can work with that outside pretty easily. And in here, that would enable us to, even if we left these at 5.5 wide, although this one's going to be 6, even if we left those at 5.5 wide, maybe we can at least get them up to 8 inches high. But I didn't show that or anything like that. I showed the 9 foot 4.5 high ceilings throughout. So the first thing I did was raise that to 9 foot 4.5, and then worked with this island. And it's important to note, I'm not in favor of this, even though I show this throughout in a lot of different photographs. I'm in favor of the 4 beams at the very end. That's what I came down in favor of, was just these with no margins and nothing else beyond that, as I recall. But in terms of this arced thing and this treatment down here with the curved wall, probably, you might interpret that in any number of ways, but I will interpret that in a few different ways going forward. But here it's just drywall, curved drywall with baseboard, and you'll have to figure out this footrail better than it's shown here. But this was that one piece curved island, and I like that. See back here, all those receptacles, all those devices, I changed those to more match that soapstone. The same with the ones down on this island, whatever the material this becomes, shown as a hickory here, whatever material that becomes, that I would think, we don't need all that gaudiness. And at the very end, this gets crowded here, I think. And this is shown as 25 wide here. These are both 17s, and the center is 25. And that brings it down to where the center is 21. But even then, at the very end, things get even a little bit more crowded here. So you'll have to think about that, or keep an eye on it as we go through. Remember, I've widened these out, or I do widen these out. I don't know if they're shown here, but eventually those are widened out to the 29 wide. They're not shown that way there, but that's where they become the 29 wide. Going forward in some of these photographs, the main thing that's going to be happening is the size of that door over there is going to be changing, or its configuration is going to be changing. Currently shown as the 6'10" right now. And you can see as we went further along, this became even more narrow here. So there's 4 inches here if you want that margin wider. And this was just a few progressions of different things as far as that ceiling goes, I guess. And then I changed this island around. Still was working with the ceiling. Really, the ceiling, I show walkthroughs of these other things, but to me this is the only valid one here. I know this has been long and arduous, and when I kind of spoke a little bit cavalierly, I said about raising these to actually 10-foot walls instead of 9'4". For one thing, you can raise these to 10-foot walls without raising this more than another inch or so, and still maintain an adequate heel height out of the margins. So I did want to mention that the outside of that doesn't really have to change hardly at all. And then we'll just go through these again. Remember, part of it is that door and what happens with that. A couple things. I don't think this is a feasible thing here, but the door is also changing there as well. And I continue to change this island a few more times, just seeing what could be done with that. And this is where this wall becomes straight across here, but I'm not sure. And the footrail becomes floor mounted only, but I'm not sure about all that extra depth back under there. And I did build an angular version where this is all 12-degree angles coming around here, made of paneling. And that's as far as I took that island development. And also back along, yeah, the ceiling stayed the same at my favorite, which was this. And this was, by the way, this was like an 1.5 inch margin on each side. And I think it worked okay over here, but I didn't really like it on the other side. And the last change here you see is this door goes from the typical 6'8" or 6'9", whatever it is, and you can see it gets a little shorter in order to accommodate this 14-inch transom lights up here. That does make the door a lot lighter, I would think. And I actually like this angular plan, and I think I show plan view of that down through here. You can see this is built as walls, angular walls, and then with the panels on top of them in there, the foot rail. And you can see that the alignment of those beams overhead doesn't really have any kind of real effect on the island itself. Last, they show this. You can get this mission, this straight one here, but it doesn't change the rubric at that top except from an aesthetic view where it might be easier to work with all horizontal lines on that facade. This would be the one you would order as the mission rectangular. The other thing to consider, if these walls go to 10 feet, so that we can get those beams chunkier, is that air handling unit goes up another 8 inches as well. So now it's 20 inches from the mechanical chase up into the place where you have to install that. And that space to get in there goes from 48 down to 40. But presumably that can all be put together and still serviced even after the insulation is in place. But it's definitely something to consider with regard to that. And this is the one with the margin beam all the way around, which is what I first looked at, and the low ceilings, it looks like. I don't know why those beams appear so dark, or all those members appear so dark. Eventually, and I'm speeding this up so that we can get through it quicker, but eventually I get rid of those. So I don't want to waste a lot of time with this. This does show you some of the, with some errors, some of the details. And this is apparently the same thing, but with that ceiling raised up the additional 3 or 4 inches. This eliminates the east and west margins, that leaves those north and south ones in place. And it's already an improvement, but I get rid of those ones as well. Justifiably so, I think. And then with what is my preference, probably will be yours as well, played at regular speed. And notice that the same thing is happening in the hall, where everything is just made more crisp like this. I really like this, frankly. Now, this clip and the next two both just review that door. The next two review the island with what I prefer, this situation here. But they change the door. First it's one tall door, then it's a shorter door with transoms like this, and finally it's a short door. And I think any of them work. So this time finally it is it. I didn't think it would have to come back, but I did. So I will look forward to hearing what you have to say on any or all of this. I don't envy you some of these decisions, although some of them seem pretty easy, or easier than others. But thank you very much again, and I will talk to you when I talk to you.